All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the digital marketing webinar series with Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. For those of you who joined us in our first webinar, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us today, we welcome you too. We did post that first recording on our website. I'm actually going to drop the link in the chat now. So if you didn't get a chance to participate in that one, you can still definitely view that recording, and it is in the chat now. So welcome, my name is Yen Ting, I'm Program Associate with Aparo. Today's webinar is the second of a three-part series. So today we'll be focused around email marketing. Very popular topic. We got a lot of awesome questions that will be answered today. So very excited. But before I turn it over to our lovely speaker, we do need to go over a few housekeeping details. So as you can see, this is a meeting setting instead of a webinar setting. We want this to be interactive. So feel free to put your camera on. If you have questions throughout the conversation, you can feel free to unmute. Please be mindful though that this is being recorded and will be shared. So if you're not comfortable with that, the chat is always still available for comments, for questions at any time throughout the presentation. Thirdly, I will send a follow-up email. It will include the deck that Eden will share today, the link to the recording, as well as any resources that might come up in the conversation. And then lastly, just a quick plug. So at Aparo, we want to make sure that nonprofits have the technical support they need to help amplify their mission. So if you're ever in need for advice, for solutions, for education, anything around technology and business processes, please don't hesitate to check us out on our website, or you can also email me directly from that follow-up email. That'll come straight from my email. We also have a newer service called Expert Connect, if you haven't heard of it yet. So that one is we connect you with one of our vetted technology vendors. So if you happen to be searching for a vendor in areas from IT support to social media management, please reach out to us. We might have some ideas for you. All right, that is it for me. I am happy to now turn this over to Eden.
Hello again. I am going to quickly share my screen, so give me 2 seconds to do that. And anyone wants to give me a little thumbs up reaction if they can see, or some indication. I can't see the screen. Okay, Yentin says she
yes, we can see.
Hope for the best. Great. All right. Well, hello again. For those that weren't on the first webinar, just a quick introduction. My name is Eden Estabrook. I've been doing digital marketing for what feels like a long time, but in particular, I focus on content marketing. So email marketing is very close to my heart because it's primarily content driven. So I'm really excited to talk to y'all a little bit about email marketing. Kind of as I prefaced at the last webinar, digital marketing can kind of be a black hole. And I know within the nonprofit industry, you know, you guys definitely your time is precious. And so the goal of this webinar is to give you quick things that you can look at for email marketing. So hopefully I can keep you from going down the rabbit hole that is email marketing. And so because of that, we're going to stay fairly top level. But as Ginting mentioned, y'all did submit some fantastic questions when you signed up for this webinar. So I definitely want to prioritize going through some of those as well, as we can get a little bit more specific. But the presentation itself is going to be a little bit more high level. So highly recommend, you know, I really do want this to be interactive. So drop questions in the chat along the way, and we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So let's talk about it, because marketing is very specific. So we can, you know, your use case might benefit somebody else on this call as well. So I'm going to just wanted to start with that. So it is not in presentation. Alrighty, there we go. There we go. All right. So first thing that everyone always asks around email marketing is, is it worth it? Do people read emails anymore? The answer is yes, they do. But emails have definitely gotten a little bit more complicated now that there are multiple browsers. So we've got people using Gmail, Yahoo still, AOL, Outlook. The different platforms have definitely complicated how people do it. But email marketing is still a very powerful tool to engage with just about anybody, whether it be your internal emails, newsletters, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, which is going to primarily be your community members or even donors. So when it's done right and when it's used effectively, it is an awesome tool that I would recommend any nonprofit to invest in, because you can get a lot of people at once and target them specifically with information that they need to know, like an event or something that you need to bring attention to. However, when it is done ineffectively, it can be a very big time suck, which is what I'm trying to save you guys from with what I'm focusing on today. So hopefully some of this will help. And the way I figured we would do it is we're just going to look at the anatomy of an email. So big shout out to Share Charlotte. They gave me permission to use one of their newsletters that came through because I needed a newsletter, and they were nice enough to allow me to use one of theirs. So starting from the top, the subject line. So the subject line, a lot of people ask questions about opening. How do you get people to open? So that area, the subject line area, is your main spot to get people to open it. If they read the subject line, especially nowadays, I mean, you guys probably all have very full inboxes. I know I do. So if an email doesn't catch my eye, honestly, I just mark them as read and I delete them without even opening. And 90% of my marketing, like the emails that I receive from just companies, usually end up that way, unless they say something really cool, like, can you make an impact in digital equity? Like, well, I want the answer to that question, so I'm going to ask. So pay very close attention to your subject lines, because that is how you're going to be getting your opens and getting to engage with people, is through that particular topic. And an underutilized part of the whole like meta behind the scenes data is preview text. So there's always going to be an option, regardless of what software you use, to auto pop to either put in your own preview text, or it'll auto populate from your body copy. So if you're not sure what preview text is, if you look in your inbox, you'll usually see, your subject line, and then there's also some little bit of text right after it. So that can be written yourself, and then it'll show in the when you send it, or instead, if you don't provide it, Doodle is going to auto-populate it, or your platform will auto-populate it. So what you can do is you can always have that preview text field is write it so that it's similar. It helps expand on what you've written in the subject line. So like, can you make an impact in digital equity? That's our subject line here. For your preview text, you can write like, learn how X nonprofit, is impacting this, or how you can volunteer to do this, or whatever action you want to elaborate on. You can do that in the preview text, and they'll take an extra 1 minute when you're building an email. So don't underestimate the power of what your subject lines and your preview text can be, because those are going to be your biggest barrier to getting people to open them. So a lot of times, even when I write emails, you kind of think through like, oh, just quickly get subject line, get it out the door, but pay a little bit of attention to them, because that's how you're going to really get that engagement. So moving down, so let me back up for a second. On the left, you're looking at the email on a desktop. On the right, you're looking at the email via mobile. And the reason I did that was I wanted to take a second to talk about, this is where email marketing gets a little bit complicated, because you've got mobile and you've got desktop. So it's shown that about 40% of people look at emails on their phone. That might even be a little bit higher. I think the data that I was able to pull was slightly outdated, but in a nutshell, a lot of people are looking at it on mobile. So how this impacts us, and we're looking at newsletters, is what is going to be up there when you're opening your phone. So if you're looking at this example on our, well, my right, probably your left, on mobile, you have a big header image, you've got links to the website, and then you have the top of an image. So is that going to help encourage people to scroll down? Or is there an opportunity to put something that might entice further movement to the top? Because you can see on desktop, it looks fabulous because you have the full pictures that you can see. You've got, these links are all in a nice little line, but it translates differently on mobile. So a lot of times the default is that it will stack. That's usually, most people use MailChimp. It's what I would recommend. It's one of the best with a user interface, despite all of its flaws, which it does have flaws. Highly recommend MailChimp. But a lot of times that default, once you hop into mobile, is that it's going to stack everything. So, that lovely line that you're seeing as you're building your email on desktop, which we normally build it on a computer, what you're going to see on desktop is going to usually stack. So you can see how the two differences there. So we are always recommending to design with a mobile first approach. And that can, based on your website, based on your newsletter design, that can look different. In this particular case, we could recommend smaller images that might stack maybe closer together. When I clicked on it, there weren't any links behind the picture. So maybe in this case, it's as simple as putting a link to the story so that if they see that top of the picture and they click on it, it'll take them to a website. Maybe those links that are up at the top need to move all the way to the bottom so that they don't distract from the awesome story that they're trying to feature in this newsletter. You could shorten the size of the header image. Is a header image actually needed? Honestly, I like header images. I would recommend them, but definitely keep an eye out for those sizes because they can take up a lot of space. And you're gonna have to mess with it a little bit. That's why I want to make these things conversational, because everybody's case is a little bit different. So as you're building these things, adjust a size, see what it looks like, preview it. MailChimp has previews for both desktop and mobile. They might not be 100% perfect, but they will work. Another thing to keep in mind with images is that images render differently depending on what email platform you use. Outlook is an absolute jerk when it comes to emails. So it will, because a lot of times, unless somebody manually sets it, images won't auto load or they'll render differently. Gmail is the saint in this area. Anyone who has Gmail is going to see it and it's going to look beautiful. Outlook is another story. So keep that in mind as well when you're thinking through your ratio of images to text, in that somebody who, if you have a lot of people and, depending on what backend software you use for like your CRMs, in marketing, a lot of times we use HubSpot, and through HubSpot, we're actually able to get data on what email platform is being used. So like if we know that 50% of the people that we're looking at are looking at it on Outlook, then we're just like, oh gosh. So if that's information you have available, fantastic. If not, just assume, because Outlook is extremely well used. I use it for work. It's a good platform for everything else except for rendering images. Definitely something to keep in mind. With that said, do not shy away from images. They're definitely good. They help break up text and make things a little bit more engaging, but just proceed with caution with emails, because with pictures in emails, because there's always room for rendering issues, or it could make things load slower because they're bigger, or they can cause some complications along the way, but still use them. Just look at it and say what would really be enhanced by an image and what doesn't need an image. or could maybe be condensed. Which gets me to size, the length of images. So we're talking about newsletters here. And so newsletters tend to have a lot of information in one email, which is fine, but I would note that the attention span has gone down greatly. One thing we are always tracking is how long or how far down do people actually read emails. And it's not good, especially the we'll say my generation, millennials on down. We have lost a lot of our attention span, especially as it comes to emails and videos and everything. And it's just the way that it is right now. So a lot of times when we're looking at email data, I don't think I've ever seen an email that's been all the way down. So with that recommendation, keep your most important stuff at the top and, you know, still add everything that you need to, but also understand that there's a really, really, really high chance that it's not going to be read past the middle of the email. Really good chance of it. So that can vary by, you know, industry who's receiving the emails, but as a general rule of thumb, especially newsletters, which tend to go to a very broad audience because it's somebody who's interested in your organization, wants to be receiving more information about it. A lot of times those are going to be a little bit more broader audience, and so you're probably going to run into the size and them not scrolling all the way. Although I'll say I proudly scroll through all my newsletters from the nonprofits that I subscribe to. So but that's not always.
I believe Kim,
Yes.
you had raised your hand. If you wanted to ask a question, you're on mute right now. There you go. Oh, you went back on mute.
Is that better?
There you go.
There you are.
Okay.
Yes.
So I have a question regarding the newsletter and the audience that you're sending it out to. Statistically, are there any 3 areas in terms of subject matter that in the general scope of things that might work best, since, you know, people aren't reading a whole newsletter? Could you recommend 3 top areas, please?
Yeah, so part of it will depend on your industry, but I think for nonprofits, you're going to want to focus on upcoming events. So I would definitely keep those up on top, because that's also something you can provide a clear call to action to underneath it. So like, you know, we have X event coming up, you know, sign up here. I would also say success stories, or, you know, stories of or impact stories would be another area that I would look to. I would shy away from donation specific content in a newsletter and reserve those for its own email. So, you know, like you have a newsletter that can have all the, you know, what's happening with your organization, like the upcoming events, you know, impact stories, and then you can create separate, probably even templatized emails that you could just send out every so often to remind about like donations or ways that you can give back. If you have an immediate need, I would definitely keep that up on the top too. So that would be the 3rd section that I would recommend, is like, you know, hey, we really need towels donated right now. Like, you know, and then just put a link to like your email address, or however it is that the person that reads it can learn how to help you fulfill that need if they can help meet it. So to recap, events, upcoming events, impact stories, and immediate needs would be the 3 that I would recommend.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Yeah, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will say, Yentine, that I can't see the chat right now, so you'll have to just let me know if somebody does.
Right.
All right, cool. Great. Just checking my notes, make sure I touched on everything for this slide. I think I might have mentioned it beforehand, but images, one thing that you can do, this is more from just an accessibility standpoint, is you can also put alt text behind it. So highly recommend doing that. It's real quick, and that's just more so making sure that whoever receives your email, if the images don't load, they can see what the image is. images. So that's a good way of, with working around Outlook, is if you put an alt text, if it's not loading, they should be able to roll over it and see what the alt text is, and they should see like, oh, picture of boy looking at tablet, as well as helps meeting some just digital accessibility recommendations. So that's another quick way that you can help make sure that if for whatever reason your images don't load, you are still covering your bases and people can still at least see what it is. Cool. All right. Any questions about what I've talked about on this slide before I move on? Great. Oops. All right, questions. So one thing that we wanted to do was provide some live feedback on some newsletters. So y'all submitted some newsletters when you registered. And so there were a lot of that were sent in, and I'm sorry that I can't look at every single one of them. I picked 2 at random. So I just wanted to pull them up and do that. And then I also wanted, after that, I'm just trying to address some questions that were also submitted. So as I said, jump in though, if you have any questions that come to mind as you're listening. So bear with me as I pull it up real quick. Okay. It's Zoom. Here we go. Okay. Alrighty. Let me know if you can see.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Cool. So this one is from Charlotte Lit, which I haven't actually, I think, interacted with, but after reading it, made the assumption you guys do some literacy, which I think is fantastic. So thank you all for what you do there. As a writer, I really do appreciate I really do appreciate what y'all do. So this is a PDF version, which means that we're not going to be able to really talk about formatting. So I looked at it primarily from a copy side of things. I can't tell if you did have links within your PDF, within your images. So just looking at it said purely from a what's written and some of the formatting that I could pull out. So right off the bat, I think it's awesome that you put something so high saying what you're going to see below. I think Ron Rash and 100 Lit fans lit up the Midwood Center on Friday. See the images below. You're telling your people that are opening it on mobile that if they keep scrolling, they're going to see everything that y'all did in that event, which I think is fantastic. Down here, so we have a lot of links, which is probably partially done because you have partners and you want to make sure you're representing your partners, but also do understand that the more links that are involved, the higher the chance that somebody is going to leave your email and not come back. If it's anything like my phone, if I click on a link, it's an absolute pain getting back to what I was beforehand. So this includes even accidentally clicking a link. So I always say, when it comes to including links in an email, is do it where you have to, but try to make it as targeted as possible. So if you don't have to put in a link, just stick to a one like call to action box. And that could be, if you put a box underneath, underneath Kathy and Paul there that just says, learn more about this event, feature all of your donors like Southern Strain Brewing and Sycamore Brewing, feature them on that and links out to them on the webpage versus in the email, just so that it's a little bit more targeted and people won't be as distracted by the different links. They're also, depending on the platform, you could also include things like for the photographers, using it as a caption, like thanks to Aroha Productions underneath the images. So maybe it's just a little bit smaller. Those are a couple ways that you could look to optimize that space. but I would definitely recommend at the end of something to put a button with a clear next step for them. And, you know, in this particular case, it would look like you'd want people to learn more about the event and maybe learn more about how they can be a part of what's next for Charlotte Lit. So that would be kind of like a learn more button underneath that just directs people to a web page or one of your existing web pages that would help them answer that question. Here we have a couple text paragraphs. So I think it's great that the use of bolded text is a good way of calling people's attention to a particular part of a paragraph. Whenever there are large paragraphs, I always say look for an opportunity to try to bullet point or help break it up a little bit. Long paragraphs of text, thinking in terms of mobile, those are also going to stack and squeeze. So those are going to get a little bit longer. So any way to shorten that into, like I said, a bulleted list or, you know, or trim it a little bit, that'll definitely work in your favor in the long run, especially if you're thinking about it from a mobile first approach, you know, because once again, all that's going to stack. So those 2 paragraphs, without anything breaking it up in between on the phone could be just a lot of, you know, a lot of scrolling. So whenever I see dual paragraph things, I always think it's really cool to try to add like a paragraph next to it on one side and then add another image next to the other paragraph on the other side, just to add a little bit of visual interest. Part of that will be dependent on what software was used and what modules are available, but incorporating either like a single image next to it to kind of help draw some attention, or shortening it with bulleted lists would be a great way to optimize that section, because it's fantastic information. So we just want to make sure people read it. There were a couple of images here. As I said, this is one of those areas that I can't quite speak to because I'm going to guess that it looks a little bit different when it's in a email platform, but the sizes are a little bit off. So there's a big possibility that if it was opened in Outlook, there might have been some challenges there. So if there are ever an option in an email platform to maybe condense photos, if they have a gallery type module, once again, that's going to truly depend on what capabilities you have. But I would definitely look for any ways to squeeze those together, because once again, all of these will stack on mobile. So we've got, I think, several, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so there's 5 images without anything in between, which means on mobile, there are going to be 5 images stacked on top of each other, which could be a little bit long for somebody scrolling. If you think back to my comment about attention spans, what I always like to do when it comes to a lot of images is it's really hard to do a lot of images in an email is if you have a page for your event on your website, is add the photos to that web page as a gallery, because most web pages or most web platforms will have a gallery setting, and then link out to that page in the email and just tell people see event photos, or, you know, something very clearly telling them that they'll see event photos, and just tease a couple versus doing all of them. That way people can still see some of the awesome photos that were taken, but then if you want to show off all of them, you can have that done in like a gallery setting on a website where the picture capabilities are a little bit stronger than in email. As I mentioned earlier down here, something where there's an event coming up, I would definitely recommend trying to bring that higher, but I also would also say that it's going to depend on what their goal was for this newsletter. So with it being news, I always think that anything where we want immediate action, like, you know, come to this event, or I would want to move that. I would recommend moving that higher up, and then putting the event recap just a little bit lower, just so that people can definitely see that there's an event coming up before they start getting into some of the more like, here's what event, here's what, here's an event that we had, here's how it went, like, here's the impact of this event, which are still great, but the upcoming event, it will definitely be seen if it's higher. So these types of buttons are my favorite types of buttons, by the way. The, big color, bold text in the middle. This is what I would recommend. Now, use your own colors, use your own brand colors, obviously, but those sort of buttons are what's going to grab people's attention. This is a really prime example of whenever you hear me talking about buttons, this is what I'm talking about. Big, bold rectangle with bold text telling you, here's what you're going to do if you click this button. You're going to get to register for this. You're going to get to see photos. You're going to get to, impact our mission, whatever it is. So this one is very long. We have a lot of text here. So they have a lot going on though. So this is one of those situations where I'd say, is there a way to, condense some of the information? Is there a way to, you said use bullet points, use something to help shorten it. And if there's truly not, then this is where our conversation about prioritizing the different content that's going to be in your newsletter comes in, because all of this could very well be extremely important information that the readers need to know. So then that's where you'd want to think through, okay, in what order am I putting it in? So like this gala that they're having on the 22nd, do we want people to for sure see this versus the the event recap? And then you start reorganizing based on that, because I know if there's a lot going on, you want to make sure people see it. For an area where there's a lot of events, you could also consider one-off emails where you create an email specific to an event and send that out to your email newsletter list, so that it's not within one larger email. And a lot of times you can make a template of sorts to do that. So just make like a template in your MailChimp or whatever it is that you use for like event notifications, and then have it set up so you just swap out an image, you swap out the text inside, and every time you have a new event, send out a one-off email. I think those are really good ways of making sure if you do have a lot of stuff going on, you can still add them to your newsletter, but you're also providing an opportunity for your subscriber list to see specialized content about what's going on, so they can open it and be like, oh, they're having an event. I didn't know that, if they didn't make it all the way to the bottom, and you really want people to know about this 100th anniversary gala, like send out a specific email. And templates are honestly your friend. Like, I'm not a designer. I always tell people that right off the bat. And I've used all the softwares that I've used have always had some sort of template involved. For social media, like Canva is a great tool. They have so many different templates that, you just swap out images, you can switch out your colors. And, it makes even me a decent designer. So look at MailChimp as well. And then one trick that we use in marketing all the time is we clone email. So if you've made an email once, that means you've made it every other time. You just clone it, which there's always a clone option. And then you just swap out all the different information, keep the formatting exactly the same, and then you just send it out. And you can just keep doing that over and over again. There is no need to ever redo the design unless you have a change in branding, because people aren't going to remember what your previous email said. So they're not going to be like, oh, they used this design last time. Like, they're not going to remember. So it's a really quick way of doing a lot more is if you just don't build every email that you do from scratch. If you have a newsletter, copy your newsletter and just fill out all the information, refill out the information, swap out images, and move on. All right. I think the rest of this was text. I think we've already really talked all about this, highlighting or bolding copy is really a good way. So all that at the beginning, this is a tactic that I used quite a bit, where you put a little, like this whole story, Charlotte, : make that bold, and then a little bit of description. A great way to format something. I use it quite a bit. It's a good way to call attention to something. And if somebody is like, oh, Charlotte Reader's podcast, I'm interested, then they'll go and they'll draw their attention to the rest of the text. So this is a solid tactic. And this is all just footer. So yes. Okay, cool. All right. That was one. I just want to keep track of my time because I do want to get to questions that were submitted. All right, 12:36. I will, well, I guess I should ask, does anybody have any questions about what I kind of just went through, or email in general? I feel like I've talked really fast. I see somebody raise their hand. Yes. I think it's Caitlin.
Do you find that there is a time of day in which there are greater amount of opens? I just wanted to say thank you so much for the information that's been provided thus far. Or are there any sort of analytics that we should be following to be able to capture the greatest amount of opens? Because our open rate currently is higher than the national average, but I'd like to improve on our open rate for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So currently, and this does change often. So, but last I checked, your ideal times to send an article are going to be, or send an email are going to be around 10 a.m. or right around, I would say, 3 o'clock. The reason being is, so if you think about your normal 9 to 5 workday, when do people start kind of dwindling off? For everyone, it's usually right before lunch or right before the end of the workday. So historically speaking, we've always found the most success sending it around then. You're going to want to avoid sending emails on prime times like 8 o'clock in the morning. You'd think that that's a good time to do it, but keep in mind, people are catching up on emails from the night before, like I have colleagues on the West Coast and they're sending me emails at 9 o'clock my time because that's 6 o'clock their time. So it's still going to get buried kind of in that beginning. I'm going to be more focused on knocking out the emails from the night before. If you send it in the morning, and then if you send it at nighttime, then same problem. Lunchtime is also a no-go because everybody is going to get lunch. So, avoid that. Also keep in mind proximity to holidays. So like, for example, 4th of July weekend is coming up. So you're saying, okay, don't send it on the 4th of July. I also wouldn't send it on the Friday before the 4th of July. Because some companies are actually off that day. My company is, I know a few others that are. So you're going to have another dead zone, basically. It's always recommended just provide some space. You also might want to avoid sending it the day after a holiday because people's inboxes are really full from being gone for 2 or 3 work days, that they're going to be buried in emails. So, coming on to 4th of July weekend, I would make July 1st through July 5th just a no email zone. And that will also help improve the timing of when you send it, not just during the day, but during the week. Tuesdays are also, for whatever reason, the highest tracked days for opening opens emails. That's remained pretty consistent over the 5+ years that I've been doing this. I can't tell you why, but the data has just said that Tuesday's a good day. My personal hypothesis would be because it's not a Monday and people have just kind of gotten into the swing of things, so they're feeling really productive versus near the end of the week when they're just kind of like, oh my gosh, is it Friday yet? So, but that's just Eden Esterbrook's hypothesis. So I believe Thursday is also second to Tuesday. So, but once again, there's actually hasn't been provided an explanation as to why. Awesome. You're welcome. It's like Cynthia put a note in the chat some information. So yeah, I think that brings up a good point. If you have the internal capabilities to connect your email or whatever you send your email out to with some form of data analytics. So thinking in terms of like, I'll just use HubSpot as an example. It's a pretty common marketing CRM, works pretty well for nonprofits, but you'd want to take that on a case-by-case basis. Within HubSpot, they have a way, they have internal email sending. And so what that allows them to do is you can see all the data along with all your other data. So everything is together. So if you have a way to integrate your CRM software, your website, anything that you can integrate together so that everything is working together, would highly recommend it. And if that's something you're not sure how to tackle, I'm sure Aparo has a program like technology tutoring or maybe a community impact project where they can definitely provide volunteers that can help work through that, because dealing with the technology stack is challenging. It really is. You have a lot of different technology with a lot of different uses, and it provides so much insight if you get it set up correctly. And that's usually where things fall down when it comes to setting up digital marketing, is once you have everything set up, it does almost half the work for you. You just have to look at it. But getting it set up is what's usually the barrier. So some note in the chat. There are malware firewalls now that will cause you to have a false open click rate. Oh, I haven't actually heard of that. Cleaning out email lists. That's a really good question. So yes, you should absolutely get rid of bounced email addresses. I personally, when I did email marketing for clients, I would clean out the list after every newsletter that I sent. That might be a little excessive for, a nonprofit staff, but I would at least do it every other month. Or if you have the time to do it every month, that would be ideal. The reason being, it's just going to inflate your numbers, and you're not going to get a good feel for how people are interacting with it. It also will, if you also want to look out for unsubscribes, because for whatever reason, sometimes unsubscribes don't actually get removed from the list. It'll just be pinged as like, oh, we unsubscribed, but it stayed in the list. So email lists are really funky. I personally hate them with a passion. And they really do have to be babysat a little bit, even within some pretty advanced software. So this is kind of, at the moment, just the lay of the land. But it will get better. I know it. So keep an eye out for anything that's bounced, or if there's any unsubscribes, just maybe check one and see if it was removed. And if it was, great, just leave the rest of them and move on. But yes, definitely clean your inbox. And if possible, if you know somebody who maybe, switched organizations, update their email manually in your system so that it's up to date when you know it. But that can also help if you update it immediately. It helps with forgetting down the road to that somebody might have moved. So any little tricks that work for you to keep your email list clean, definitely do that. Okay, great. I'm just going to pull up my list of questions. Everyone had some really good ones. Okay, so one person asked in the questions is, how often should we be emailing our audience? So we touched on it a little bit with times and days, but from a cadence perspective, a newsletter should probably be no more than once a month. So think in terms of once a month, once a quarter, or, if you're going to do a newsletter, once a month, once a quarter, or just like, one like a biannual one. So those are kind of going to be what would kind of be the cadences that are most common and what people are expecting. Once a month is obviously going to be a great way to build a lot of data really quickly, but then it requires you to make one once a month. So if you're unsure about the investment around that, consider a once a quarter email. So that'd be 4 emails in a year, and then one-off emails, like I talked about, like those little short emails that'll tell people about your events, or if you have a really impactful story that you want to share, highlight that, and do some of those kind of throughout the year, so that people are still learning about what's happening, just not in as big of a newsletter format. I'm personally a fan of little one-off emails because they're shorter, which means a higher chance of people reading the whole thing. I don't believe newsletters are obsolete. I think they're absolutely a good use of time, but they do have a little bit more challenges like the length. So we definitely want to think through like what works best based on the staffing that you have available and the time that you have dedicated to email. For one-off emails, I don't think that there's a rule on how many you can send. I wouldn't send 1, 2 back to back. I wouldn't send 2 within the same week, but if you've got 2 events in May, instead of sending 2 emails, just put them into one, like do a little feature that features the 2 events. So you can always think through how can you consolidate, or is email the best way to share about this? You might find that you have a really, really strong, Instagram following, and maybe the best way of getting the news out about your event is through Instagram. My sister personally, she's a photographer, so she works with she does wedding photography, and she has found that one of the tips that when I asked her for some social media tips that I could provide to you is that she finds a lot of benefit from tagging her vendors that she works with, because that helps expand the reach. So if you're looking at it from an event perspective, it's possible that an email isn't even the correct spot to look at. In digital marketing, you consider you have your digital marketing toolbox, but you don't have to use every single one of them. So, think through if you haven't gotten a good open rate in a couple of years, it could be that your audience engages better with you on Instagram, and you should invest more time there versus email. So don't think because people do emails, we should just do an email. It may not be the best fit, and that's okay. I've nixed so many tools along the way because it's just like, this just doesn't work. Like, can we explain why? No, I've had to drop several tactics in my career because of that. It's just like, I cannot get it to work, and it's just a waste of my time. So I'm going to invest that time into something else. So I know we're not talking about social media today, but bonus material. Social media really is a good way to get your information out, and the tagging capabilities where you can engage your different vendors, your donors. It's a great way of expanding reach. So, if you're unsure, if after this webinar, you're like, man, email seems more complicated than I want to deal with, maybe put it on hold for a little bit. I don't know. And look into how social media might work better. You really want to find what mix of digital marketing tools work for you. And email is definitely a very popular one, but it's not the only. So don't feel discouraged. All right. Track of time. Okay. We have best practices to improve campaign click rates. So within the context of email, so click rates are affinity. The prioritization that we talked about earlier is going to be key. So prioritization of content as well as clear call to actions. So I think if you were on my webinar 2 weeks ago where we were talking about website, I was talking about the goal of your digital assets should be to drive them to drive your viewers to, ultimately we want them to talk to you or engage with you, but you want to drive them towards a certain thing. There's a lot happening on the web, so we want to be very clear about, okay, you're looking at this, you're going to go here. Those buttons are honestly, I said, they're fantastic. Put your content and then put a button and, try to eliminate the distractions around the button. So like hyperlinks and stuff like that. Those are things that can distract from them actually clicking. So you'll want to try to remove whatever distractions to the action that you want them to take. And that's going to help with improving that internal click-through rate. If you have multiple buttons throughout the email, that's totally fine, but definitely prioritize because people will sometimes trail off after the first couple of sections. I personally ran into that issue with most of the emails that I've read that I've made and had to look at the data afterwards. So definitely take a little bit of understand that it could kind of trickle off near the bottom there. But that top spot, it really is your feature spot, your hero spot. So put the thing that you absolutely need people to see up there and then go down the list from there. All right. What are the most effective ways to organically grow your brand and fundraise effectively and efficiently? Okay, so organic tactics. So email is obviously a really good one. That's free. You can templatize it. It's pretty straightforward once you get it all set up. From a outside of email, which I know we're trying to stick to email for this, but it's whatever. Social media is going to be your best friend from there. You ultimately just want consistency across your different tools. So if you're talking about it from a brand perspective, so your organization, you want everything that you're working on digitally to have some form of consistency. And from a visual side of things. So like, if you have a certain logo and certain colors, make sure your email, make sure the stuff that you put on social media, all of that kind of matches, so that when people start seeing those things, they're going to associate it with you. Some other organic ways you can, they're more time consuming, but you can always create educational articles or stuff around shareable content, basically content that you can post on your social with stories. And that's a really good way of engaging with people. Some more fun things is like Instagram polls and just other ways that you can just engage with the people that you are working with. But as I mentioned earlier, time is always my biggest concern for, diving too deep into the digital marketing sector. So if you're going to entertain a wide variety of tactics, just understand that one, it'll take time and it'll take resources. So definitely focus as much as you can on a few and work on those and take it in chunks versus trying to cast a wide net, because it can get overwhelming. And it's also anything organic is going to be a slow grow, which means you might not see results from it for 2 to 3 months. And we want to make the most of your time. So I would, focus on these small optimizations that I've talked about, like in the previous webinar, in this one for email, and from an organic side of things, and come back on the 30th. We're going to talk about paid advertising. So we are going to give you some tips on what you can do if you have a paid advertising budget or just want to know what that could look like. So, yeah, just to kind of put a bow on the 2 that we've done on organic stuff, just, don't overcast your net because you might find it just way more overwhelming than it needs to be. And I would definitely start with the website, like I talked about last week, and email. And we'll talk about social media more in depth on the next webinar. So with that said, it is 12:55. So,
Might
I
have
can-
time for one more question if anyone has any
yeah.
final questions. I don't know if there's a quick question on the registration form you might be able to answer.
Yeah. I answered that one. What catches audiences' attention best is one question that was asked. And I would say from an email side of things, you just would want to use, I said, short text and images sparingly, but we like to skim. So if you have a way that you can said avoid paragraphs of text as much as you can, because those will stack on mobile, and try to think in terms of lists. So even if you're putting together like an event, you could put your event title at the top and then a bullet list of like, it's on Wednesday, like Wednesday, July, whatever, on one bullet. Then underneath it, put the location at here, time here, and try to think in terms of like, how can we take it out of a paragraph form and into something that's more digestible in a smaller sense. So that's going to be just easier for everyone to read. And it'll also free up some room on your email to be able to include more things like a really awesome image from your event. So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Eden, for another hour of a lot of great information. We look forward to having you again in our third and final session that you alluded to already. That one will be joined by, is it your colleague? Friend?
Yes, my colleague, Tim, he's a digital advertising specialist, and really excited for y'all to meet him and bring all your paid advertising questions. He's actually worked in nonprofit before, so he's very familiar with the industry and is really excited to help you guys think through how paid advertising, how to stretch your dollars there. So
awesome, very exciting. So we hope to see all of you again in a couple of weeks. I will be sending up that follow-up email with the deck that Eden shared early in this presentation, as well as the link to this recording and a couple of the resources that we did talk about today. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today, and see you guys next time.